Now in this region, there were already two powerhouses on the Ocoee River. They were simply named Ocoee number 1 and Ocoee number 2. Then in the 1930s, late 30s, TVA built the Hiwassee Dam and Hiwassee Powerhouse further into North Carolina on the Hiwassee River. Then, in 1940, they built not one but two more powerhouses and dams. They built the Apalachia Dam and Apalachia Powerhouse, and over on the Ocoee, they built Ocoee number 3. So that gave us a total of 5 dams and powerhouses in this region. So everybody got to wondering, there ain't that many folks out here. Why are we generating so much electricity? Well, the electricity was not meant for here. You see, up the road a ways, outside the city of Knoxville, over from Knoxville, there was a little bitty town. Started out with just a few hundred residents. And then the government came in, built a massive complex in that little bitty town called Oak Ridge, Tennessee, for nuclear research. Well, nobody told us what was going on in there at the time. They had no idea it was for nuclear research. So we called it the Secret City. But that facility used a tremendous amount of electricity between Oak Ridge and the Knoxville area during the war years. They used up 10% of all electricity generated in the 48 states of America. That's a lot of juice. So what that meant was the people outside of Knoxville, in towns like Maryville, Sweetwater, all those towns outside of Knoxville, they had to get their power from somewhere else besides Knoxville, and that's why they built all these dams and powerhouses. All this power, electricity, went north. Now during the war years, when they were fully operational, it became operational in December of 1943, both the Apalachia Powerhouse and the Ocoee number 3. So that was just the nick of time for the facility in Oak Ridge. Once it opened, they needed all that power there. Besides, there were other industries around Knoxville. You had Alcoa Aluminum, very important to the war effort. And you had the Knoxville Munitions Plant, where they built bombs and mortars and such. You also had a lot of subcontractors building parts for the war effort around Knoxville, so they had to use that electricity there, and the cities around Knoxville used electricity generated around here. Now the Apalachia Powerhouse is 9 miles away from the Apalachia Dam. So to get the water from the dam to the powerhouse, they bored a huge tunnel. That tunnel is 16 feet in diameter. You just about fit this train inside of it. It's so big. And at the what they call the penstocks above us at the powerhouse, they split into 2 smaller pipes that are 8 feet in diameter. And we will see them when we go through the powerhouse. We actually go through the middle of the powerhouse complex. You'll see the footbridge and the powerhouse on your left, and you'll see the big water pipes on your right. Now once the powerhouse was up and running, it performed very well, generated electricity for a long time. But that powerhouse had a little bit to do with why we were able to run a tourist train up here. You see, in 2003, both the generators needed replacing. They had 2 generators in there, and that's no small task. So they had to resurrect the railroad between Etowah and the powerhouse to bring new generators in and take the old generators out. Once completed, the railroad was clear. In 2004, the Tennessee Valley Railroad teamed up with the Tennessee Overhill Association, and we ran some experimental trips, see how interested everybody was, and they were wildly popular. So many folks in this area had family that worked for L&N, so they got to see the line that their family had worked on. once those powerhouse trips in 2004, we finished them. In 2005, that's when they started running the iron ore out. And in 2006, since those powerhouse trips were so popular, we started our own tourist train full-time in 2006. April through November is our tourist train schedule.
Is it the last one of the season?
Yes.
So when they resurrected the tracks, they put over $2 million worth into it in 2004. Well, fast forward to 2021, and 2020 was kind of a bad year, not only because of COVID shutdown, but we had a very bad storm come through here. That same storm that had tornadoes in Chattanooga and Cleveland that did so much damage, it dumped about 5 inches of rain in about 30 minutes on these tracks. Unbelievable amount of water. Clogged up all the culverts, and we had 6 washouts and 3 landslides that covered up the tracks. So that did us in until September of 2020. We weren't able to get the track crew up here until August because we weren't running trains in Chattanooga until June. So we finally saved up enough money, sent the track crew up here, and they had us running by the middle of September in 2020. Well, a lot of that damage was done once you got past Farner. A lot of those cross ties were kind of just sitting around in water, and it speeded up the rotting process. And so in early winter of 2021, we had our regular inspection by our Federal Railway Administration, and he shut us down. There was so much damage done not only by the storm but over time, and it was time to put more money into the tracks. So by September of 2021, we finally got enough up par to run to Farner and back, our half-day trip. And then this year, finally, we got everything fixed all the way to Copperhill. So as the song says, life is like a mountain railroad. All kind of twists and turns happen. To the generators, and the water wasn't flowing through here, and it was much lower. Right now, if you look across the tracks, you'll see a big concrete boat ramp. That boat ramp is where our rafting services, Hiwassee Outfitters and Webb Brothers, bring you up to, drop you off there, and let you float gently down the river. That normally takes about 3 to 3.5 hours just to go with the flow. Now the younger kayakers claim they can make it in 1 hour. Well, that's fine. Y'all go right ahead. I'm going to enjoy the scenery here. It is a very beautiful river, very clean river, clean water, as most of it does go through the Cherokee National Forest. Now there all across the river you see a river road,
I see it.
and in a moment you'll hear the engineer blow the horn for a road crossing by the powerhouse. TVA cut a road in off of a forestry road up on the mountain, and that way they can access the powerhouse with their big trucks for repair and maintenance.
You think that's the road y'all went on over there? River Road?
We passed the footbridge.
Y'all went past all of That's where they were. There was one in Maggie Valley.
So here we are coming into the powerhouse complex. See the footbridge and the powerhouse on the left, and in a few moments the big pipes on the right.
Amanda has done a few times, but Mom was never been. Something me and Dad just done because we didn't figure Mom would like it, and she didn't figure she'd like it. And Gabby wanted to go this year, so she's like, yeah, we'll go. But she enjoyed it. The only thing is there's not the hotels on it. Very nice, very impressive.
All right, car number 1. Look to your right and you'll see the big water pipes, 8 feet in diameter, that take the water rushing down the mountain under our tracks and into the
Come back
basement
up here
where the turbines are.
and
Car number 2.
get some more
We're
footage of
passing
this
by those
bridge in
big
this
water
area
pipes
up here
now.
sometime.
Car number 3, you're passing between the pipes and the powerhouse. Pipes on the right, powerhouse on the left. Car number 4. And car number 5, passing between the water supply pipes and the powerhouse. It gets very narrow in an area that we amazingly call the Narrows.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll tell you all about the Narrows in just a few moments when we get there.
I wonder if this is what the river looked like. Yeah, I saw it. I wonder if this is what the river looked like before they built the powerhouse and dammed it up and all. This is very interesting. As I was saying before, if you couldn't hear me before, me and Teresa may come back up here to the Appalachian Powerhouse and go out on that footbridge and take some more footage in a later video. Now this is what the river looks like now. As he was saying, the host was saying, the river actually is lower, much lower than what it used to be before they dammed it up. The water is called upstream, and then I take it and goes through a tunnel, pipes through the mountain, and then drops down to the powerhouse to create the power, to produce the power. And so this is what it looks like between the dam and the powerhouse.
Into the NARS right now. Well, you and I from Tennessee know what he's talking about, but a lady stopped me. She said, "Excuse me, sir, what is a NAR?" I said, "Well, that's how we pronounce the word narrows down here in southeast Tennessee." "Where are you from, ma'am?" She said, "New York." So whether you call it the Narrows or the NARS, we are there. Now you're going to see some interesting rock formations. You're going to see rocks that have been washed smooth in semicircular patterns, and you're going to see rocks with holes in the top of them. In fact, the narrowest part of the river, an area about 4 to 5 feet across, comes to 2 rocks with holes in the top, come together, and you can literally jump across the river in one jump. But as you can see through here, it wouldn't be hard to walk across, stepping from rock to rock. And there you start seeing some of those rocks with holes in them. And Mr. PW had a pretty good explanation about those holes. He said, well, what would happen is there would be a crack in the rock, and sand and dirt and small rocks would fall down in that crack, and the current would carry it around and around. Crack developed a little bit bigger into a small hole. More rocks would jump in there with it, and they'd get carried around and around. And in just a few thousand years, you'd have a big old hole wallered out in that rock. So there's your other PW word today, wallered. But now we're starting to see some of those interesting semicircular patterns. All that was done by just the force of the water coming through the river before the dam was built. In fact, across the river, you'll notice there's a smooth area to the rocks, and it comes all the way up to meet the rough area. That was the original depth of the river. So as you can see, when they blocked off the river, they cut the flow down drastically in this area. All right, car 1, start looking down to your left there. You'll see the narrow spot, 2 rocks sticking out toward each other with holes in them. Car number 1. Car number 2, coming up on the 354 milepost. That means if we turned around and all the switches were aligned correctly, in 354 miles, we would be in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. That was the old headquarters for the L&N. they had what they called the 0 milepost in Louisville. So all of L&N tracks were measured out of Louisville, Kentucky. Now L&N had a big railroad. They covered a lot of area. They went as far north as Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, went as far south as New Orleans, Florida, Panhandle of Florida, all through the southeast. But right here coming up, you'll see the 3, there it goes, car 2, just past 354 milepost. That means we're 354 miles out of Louisville, Kentucky. Now ahead of us at the 355 is our second ghost town, the old ghost town of McFarland, Tennessee. And McFarland was a railroad town. They had a big depot. They had an old railroad hotel for the crews. And they had the section houses. Now the section houses were called that because the fellers that stayed there were required to take care of a section of the track. They were responsible for the maintenance repair of all the track between Reliance, where our bridge was, and Farner up at the top of the mountain. Now on the other side of Farner, a different section gang took care of the tracks. So all along between Marietta and Knoxville, you had all these section gangs. And there was one stayed here in McFarland. Now the big depot was a crew change point. A train would come out of Marietta, and it made this far north. It would pull into the siding. They'd tie the train down. The engineer and the steam locomotive fireman would hop out of the engine, and they'd meet the conductor and the flagman in the depot, and they'd all sign out. As soon as they'd signed out, they'd go out the back door of the depot into the railroad hotel. Now this was not a Holiday Inn Express by any means. It was pretty rudimentary. All you had in a small room was a bunk, a sink, a mirror, and a bathtub. But that's all you needed, because once you got cleaned up in your hotel room, you'd go downstairs, get a bite to eat, then take a good long nap. A few hours later, the crew caller would knock on your door, and he would wake you up, and you and your crew would take a different train back south to where you came from, either Marietta or other points south. Well, all that rocked along pretty good, especially with the AK&N when their business started improving. But then in 1906, everything changed when L&N bought the railroad. In 1908, they moved the crew change point up to their newly built town called Etowah, Tennessee. So the old railroad hotel was boarded up. L&N also changed the way they did track maintenance. Instead of having all these section gangs scattered up and down the track, they would put all their workers on work trains, and those work trains would run out of terminals like Etowah, Knoxville, Marietta, Canton, places like that. And so the old section houses were torn down. Now eventually the old railroad hotel got a little bit of use. It was resurrected around 1925 and was used as the very first ranger station for the newly formed Cherokee National Forest. But eventually the Forest Service built more permanent offices closer to civilization, and the old railroad hotel was torn down, and eventually the depot was torn down, and all we're going to see is a little clearing on the right side at the 355 milepost where the old depot used to be. Car number 2, here it comes, right there. It's a big one. Car number 3, you're passing by Tremageddon. Cars 4 and 5. There it is on the right.
Ooh, right there. Wow. That was a huge tree.
Now our next point of interest will be our third and last ghost town, the old ghost town of Apalachia Station. Apalachia Station was the railroad point for the town of Apalachia. But the town of Apalachia was actually across the river. So to get from the town to the depot, you floated across the river on a ferry boat.
interesting.
But we'll tell you what happened to Apalachia and Apalachia Station when we get up there closer to them. In the meantime, we will tell you a little bit about the rail cars that you are riding in. If you are in car number 1, that car was built in 1946 by the American Car and Foundry near St. Louis, Missouri, and it was built for the L&N Railroad, the Louisville and Nashville. It's the L&N 3101. That never ran on this line. It ran on their prize passenger train called the Hummingbird. And the Hummingbird ran between Cincinnati, Ohio, and New Orleans, Louisiana. Car number 1 served as the L&N Hummingbird car for the entire existence of the Hummingbird train. They started in 1946, and they disbanded it in the mid-1960s. And then in 1971, it got sold to Amtrak. Amtrak used it for a few years and eventually auctioned it off, and a railroad museum up in Kentucky bought it. And we bought it from them because we wanted a genuine L&N car on this genuine L&N line. So we restored it to its original configuration when it was on the L&N train, the Hummingbird, built in 1946 as the L&N 3101. Car number 2. Car 2 was built in 1947 by the same outfit, American Car. But it was built for a different railroad for a different purpose. It was built for the Missouri Pacific Railroad as what they called a grill car. The area which Mr. Dearman is sitting actually is a small kitchen. It has a small griddle, about a 1 foot by 1 foot diameter griddle, and 2 stove eyes that are all propane powered. The idea was they didn't want to spend all that money on a big expensive dining car because the Missouri Pacific only fixed breakfast or lunches on some of their trains. So they bought this grill car. Car number 2 was a grill car, as they called it. It was the Missouri Pacific 873. Now eventually they started phasing out, cutting back on it. It was also built in 1946, just like car 1. And it was built for the Central of Georgia by American Car. It was the Central of Georgia 662. Now car number 3 ran on their prize passenger train called the Nancy Hanks 2. Now if you were a Central Georgia man, you had to add that 2, because you see the Nancy Hanks 1 was a pre-war steam-powered train. But after World War II was over, America was doing great, and so all the railroads went out and bought brand new streamlined diesels. Central Georgia was no different than any other railroad, and they ran that car on the Nancy Hanks 2 between Atlanta, Georgia and Savannah, Georgia. Now they advertised it in the 40s and 50s as your Florida connection, because once you hopped off the train in Savannah, Georgia, you could hop on a Seaboard Airline or an Atlantic Coastline train that would take you on into Florida. Further down in Florida, you'd hop off their train and onto a Florida East Coast train, and you could ride all the way to Miami. So back in the day, it was possible to ride from Atlanta, Georgia to Miami, Florida with 2 connections, all on rails. Can't do that now. Amtrak doesn't serve the, there's still plenty of trains that go up and down the East Coast from Miami northward, but none of them connect with Atlanta. The only Amtrak trains in Atlanta go either up to Washington, D.C. or down south to New Orleans. So car number 3, once it served to the Central of Georgia, after Southern took over the Central of Georgia, they used it for several years. But instead of selling it to Amtrak, they donated it in the 1970s to the Railroad Museum near Atlanta, Georgia, called the Southeastern Railway Museum. And they technically own that car, so we leased that car from them. Now our friends at Atlanta Southeastern Railway Museum have a great collection of static displays, and they have a nice little short trip. I believe they have some caboose trips and so forth. It's a pretty good museum. We invite you to go visit them. But they don't have any long trips like we do. So one of their ways of making money for their museum is to rent equipment to museums like us at TVRM. In fact, the car number 3 is not the only thing we lease from them. We also lease a locomotive that we use in Chattanooga from time to time. from our friends at Southeastern Railroad Museum. So car number 3 belongs to them, but they rent it to us. Built in 1946, part of the Central of Georgia Nancy Hanks II train.
Yep.